Hello, I'm Toycat, and France has a major problem, and it's the same major problem facing the rest of the West. That's because last month their government collapsed because MPs voted to oust the Prime Minister, and so a brand new Prime Minister and a new government came in, and that one only lasted a month before narrowly escaping a no-confidence vote, and they only did that after making major concessions. To appease the Socialist Party in France, the Prime Minister had to suspend a landmark reform, and as a result of this, now pensions are not being reformed in France, which sounds like not that big of a deal. Like, pension reform is a very boring topic, and if it keeps the French government alive, then isn't that good? But if you look at what these pension reforms were, they were fairly simple because the goal was to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64. These were a signature reform of the Macron presidency, and they were a small attempt of the plan to get French government spending under control. In Europe, we spend a lot on government, it is true, but even within the euro area, you can see that France is spending a ridiculous amount. Almost 60% of all gross domestic product, that's all economic activity, is being spent by the government in France, and some of that's due to the multi-layer system of government they have, but some of that is due to the ridiculous pension system, which means that not only did you retire at 62 until 2023, and as of right now, by the way, but it also is because of the fact that French pensioners earn a ridiculous amount. This is a really good analysis from the Financial Times by John Byrne Murdoch right here, and what's really interesting is the fact that he recognizes something that is very common across the Western world, which is that prime ministers seem to be at the mercy of older people. Why is this the case? Well, take 5 major politicians right here. All of them were honest with the public about the trade-offs inherent in financing an aging society, that is to say, taking money from working people and giving it to people who are not working, and all 5 were duly punished by the public, the press, opposition politicians, or all 3. In other words, there's been a whole bunch of plans to make sure that spending by older populations, which is continually increasing, is financed in some way that is meaningful, and instead all of them have gone crazy and debt to GDP ratios have gone up nuttily. In fact, there's a crazy analysis in here which is actually true, which is the fact that French pensioners receive not just larger checks from the government than their counterparts anywhere else in the world and get them several years earlier, but also over 65s have higher average incomes than the working age population. This is something that is backed up by the source here, and what's interesting is just how this can be true. As it is right now, being a pensioner means you get money from, the government or society, depending on how you want to view the social contract, but you get money from society, from people who are working, and in France, you will make more money as a pensioner than the people who are paying your pension, which again, just to remind you, you get at a much earlier rate. This is an insane fact by itself, and kind of represents what I believe to be the major problem that we are facing, which is that we have far too many aging people, and we haven't altered the social contract to match that. What do I mean by this? Well, as a society, let's say that, let's imagine everyone has their own personal pot with the government. As an individual, you have years where you take from the system and years where you give. As an individual, between age 0 and 18, you don't work, but you expect healthcare, schools, you expect lampposts to run, you expect everything to work in society, and understandably so, right? As a 60-plus-year-old, you also have the lovely benefit we've established in the last 100 years, where if you don't have money, the government will give you some. In reality, the way it works is you pay a little into the pot, a little extra, and the government uses that money. That's how they sell it to you, and the way it actually works is we increase the amount you contribute in these green years so that you can have some extra money during these red years. If you were a net contributor, or at least a net neutral, which is a valid way you could do things, then we could have this tax level be lower, but instead people have said that, no, I want to be a net, I want to be a net taker from the state when I am too old to work, or too young to work, and in exchange, we will pay more while we're working. Now, this is a problem that is kind of compounded by the fact that we have been living longer and longer since we came up with these rules. Maybe in part because we give people money, but it means that now, instead of living to 75 as wow, that would be crazy if I could do that, now living to 80 or 85 is seen as not abnormal, but actually quite the norm. And so now we have far more years that we're taking from the system, and also because of the rise of university degrees being accepted as a norm, in some cases even like postgraduates, we now also have these years where also you want to be a net drain on the state because you got to get your education that goes past your education. And so we're taking more and more of the time where we would be earning money and putting it into our own personal pot to pay for our education or the education of our kids or the pensions of our grandparents, but we're taking all this time that we should be paying into the system and instead we're taking out of it instead. There's only two ways you can fix this. One of those is to increase the amount of tax that you pay in this time. So instead of net contributing 30% of your salary or 40% of your salary, now in some cases it's 50 or 60. Or the other way is to reduce the amount that you take during these periods. Now, I feel very uncomfortably, and most people do, about reducing the amount that we spend on schools because that is the future and I don't think we should be burning that. And so the only other solution is to slightly reduce, or at least stop increasing by the same amount, the amount that you take if you're going to keep on living longer. That is to say, if the government has a social contract that after age 65 you get a bunch of free money from people who are working, then ideally that government contract should also be saying that that amount is tied to how much those people are earning. The alternative, and the thing that is happening across the world, as you can see, is that instead what is happening is that we are just not. We are saying, okay, it's really unpopular, again, as politicians across France, the UK, and all of Europe has found, it's really unpopular to admit to people that there are far more pensioners and the amount that they have paid barely covered the amounts that they were earning while they were working, and so instead we have this problem where we're just like, yeah, let's just keep funneling more money into it. That's totally fine. And so we've gone from a situation where in 1950 we spent 2% of our gross domestic product, already very high by the way, but we spent 2% of our GDP, now up to 8% of our GDP, and it's expected to rise and rise and rise because the one part of society that is immune from, any level of austerity, the one part of society that is immune from the need to balance the budget is pensioners. It is just unacceptable politically to balance this, and so as a result, we spend more and more on pensions, and that's just the direct costs, by the way. This is just how much we literally take from people to spend that way. If you look at, say, for example, the rest of society, if you look at house prices, you can see like, oh yeah, house prices have been rising, and it doesn't really benefit you if you are if you live in your house. The price of it doesn't matter. The only time you benefit from your house price increase is when you sell or downsize, which you also only do when you're older. So we have all these ways in which you can actually make a bunch more money as a pensioner, but we haven't actually matched that with increased growth elsewhere. What is the solution? Well, tax rises. The only way that you can continue to fund a society that is getting more expensive for everyone, but in particular, is not being funded by the people who are doing this, is for tax rises to happen on everyone else. This is why the UK has to do so. This is why France has said that there'll have to be other savings elsewhere, huge government cuts to continue to pay for this. And I think that this is a bit of an untenable part of society that is a problem. And so to quickly play the devil's advocate here, to play the part of the to play the part of the protesting pensioner who says, how dare this happen, is like, well, this is a popular policy. People like pensions existing, and people love the idea that one day they will be not just okay, not just able to survive, but they will be relatively wealthy as a result of retiring. People look at this graph where they see that pensioners make more than working age people in France and go, awesome, one day I will make more money and I will have no job. That is awesome. That is the dream, right? How could you not want this? How are you, Toy Cat, coming out against not working and getting money? Are you an idiot or something? Are you trying to ruin the good thing we've got going on here? So that is the one side, and it's a very valid opinion. Or honestly, even just saying like, well, at this point, if you've been paying into the tax system for so many years, if you've been paying for pensioners right now to earn very close to working age salaries in most countries, or above it in France, if you've been paying in this many years, then isn't it fair that people start paying into yours? It's very, the way that we've set up the system is we've convinced people there is this little personal pot where, yeah, you take money out, you take a debt from the government till age 18, then you pay off that debt until you're 65, and then the government also takes some of your money. It's called social security or national insurance or whatever you want to call it in your country, but they put a little pot of money aside and then you take out of your own little pot. This is another popular opinion, which means that so many people will say, no, You cannot take that money away. It is mine. I am not taking money from working people. Ignore the fact that tax rises are happening as a result of all the spending. I am not taking money from working people or from anything like that. I'm just taking my own money back. And again, the analysis shows that this just kind of fundamentally isn't true. And it's why I would say that the actual, problem with, I would say we either have to fundamentally accept that so much of what we spend is going to go on what is, again, it's brutal, but it's a unproductive asset, right? If we spent 8% of our GDP on infrastructure, we would have a high-speed rail system across the country, and we could make it ridiculously cheap with all that extra money. If we spent 8% of our GDP on defense, I don't know, we'd be on the moon right now, launching missiles, we'd have colonies on Mars by now. If we maybe 8% is a bit too low for that, but we definitely could have a colony on the moon, okay? But if we spent 8% of our GDP on anything else, even in addition to what we already have, things would be crazy. If we spent that on schooling, we would be smart, presuming that's how school works. And so when you look at the public spending in each financial year, this is the most recent one that you can see the breakdown for, you can see that, of all the money that comes into the government, about a third of it goes away to social protections, of which the majority is pensions, and then about 10% of that goes to debt interest as well. And so much of what we put into the government via our borrowing for the future and via our taxes doesn't go to things that we actually love. If you think about how much you could increase any of these sectors by, even healthcare, right? Imagine having a healthcare system where it felt super premium. You could have these things, but the trade-off is social protection. In the same way that we could continue to fund social protection, that is mostly pensioners, but there are other benefits in there, we could continue to fund this little section of the pie at the cost of, say, in industry, agriculture, and employment, or defense, or education, or transport. But is that a good idea? Well, the answer is also no. And so what do we do instead? We keep on raising the size of the pie, and that only works to a certain point. There is a certain point at which you have to say, unless you're Kiribati or Nauru or Tuvalu, you can only spend as much money as there is in the economy. And France and Ukraine, if you look at Europe here, France is like the highest spender in the world at 57% of their GDP being spent by the government, with only Ukraine as a major country going above that, but they are at literal war for their survival. If you look at European countries, we're all pushing to the very edge of what we can physically spend before the system breaks. And is that a good idea? Well, if I was a pensioner, I would say, well, maybe, if things break, as long as they break after, that will be fine. But I would say the simplest thing we need to do for right now, at the bare minimum, right? The bare minimum starting point is that pension spending cannot rise as a percent of the value in the economy. If there are more pensioners, or indeed, if we would like to raise the spending on pensions, which we do want to do, then it can only rise by as much as the taxes are rising to match it. That is to say, if wages grow by 1%, pensions shouldn't be growing by 4%. That is to say that if the average worker is earning a salary, the average pensioner should not be getting anywhere close to beating it, because not working should never be more profitable than working. That's my crazy view. But yeah, I think that kind of comes across as like a very... What's weird to me is to me, what I just said is the most rational, normal course forwards. But to some people that sounds like, oh, you just want to punish pensioners. Oh, do you just hate... Do you just love work and want to lick the boot of billionaires who get to work for no money? It's like, no, none of that. What I want to do is have a system where we all know that the system will continue, and that we're not just assuming that a collapse is imminent, but we can stave it off for another year. Let's have a functional society. Let's have a functional government that spends on what we want. If we were to vote today, would we vote to spend a quarter of our taxes on social protection, or a third of our taxes on social protections, but about a quarter on pensions? Probably not. I think that this being the divide of the pie is probably not the way that most people would choose it today. 4% being we spend 47 billion on public order and safety. That's the entire police and CPS budget and everything. There's all sorts of ways that I think society might be better if certain crimes were actually enforced as opposed to being laissez-faire. But yeah, or even just say, what if we took that money and we gave it back to people so they could start saving for their own retirement? Imagine that. There's so many ways that you could spend differently, and as a society, we don't have this kind of government reset that I think is important, where we say, yeah, this is how we've done things forever, But this isn't what people actually want. The actually popular thing is to, if you think about the government as being this immovable object, then it's like, yeah, let's vote on the tiny little changes. But instead, we should have a from the ashes decision. I think it's one of the early US presidents who said that it's actually important that the contract between the people and the government is renewed every so often. And it hasn't been renewed for a very long time in the UK. And it will probably be renewed somewhere in your lifetime after you put a bunch of money into pensioners and then the system changes. Some generation has to be the bold first one to accept that they will pour money into pensions and not get any back themselves. And should it be us? I see the argument for no. Let's delay that until I'm old and I get money for not working. Anyway, with that said, thank you for watching. This is my video about pensions, and this is the reason that France is going through a bunch of problems. Will they solve those problems? Probably not. Anyway, thank you for watching. Hope you all enjoyed. Second channel. Oh, and if you enjoy these sorts of videos, I'm surprised by how many people I meet in real life that do, then you could give via the Patreon. It's a great way to ensure that these videos continue to exist at the schedule that they do. Anyway, thank you. Goodbye.